Okay, this is the engine oil frame inlet. The fitting comes straight back out of the rear of the motor under the header and goes into this fitting on the left rear of the frame, and it should have an insulated sleeve around it to keep the header heat from burning the hose. Now, the scavenge pump pumps the oil out of the engine through this fitting here on top of this cover through this weird looking hose. See how it's got a funky S to it there? At the top it comes up here. Now that goes into the rear the fitting that's pointing straight back out of the frame. That pumps oil back into the frame itself. On the right rear of the valve cover, this is the vent, one of the vents for the engine. It has a hose which comes straight down over to this bottom fitting on the right lower half of the frame. Now this fitting right here on top, that's above the lower fitting, this one here is supposed to tee into the starter clutch cover fitting with a hose that comes across, and it goes into one hose and then comes up above the engine, up above this way, into the top of the frame, where there will be a banjo fitting here and one here, which are connected together with a T-fitting right about here. Now you want to make this fitting, as the hose on here, as short as possible on the T, because otherwise if you have it sticking out into here, it will interfere with your throttle body, which is up here, because you need as much space on this side for your throttle body as possible. Now, an option that I used on this particular engine, because it has a right side titanium exhaust, it's pretty much one off. The fitting has been modified so it's shorter and it's a 90 degree. Now that hose by itself comes up to the front of the frame by itself into this upper frame fitting. So that's just one hose instead of teeing off into the other vent line on the upper half of the engine. And now this line here, which is for the starter clutch cover vent line, has its own hose and comes up and goes into the banjo fitting on the right side of the frame. Now you can put them on either one. All they're doing is venting the air, the combustion gases out of the engine. Okay, now that that's hopefully cleared up or confused, we'll go on to the transmission vent and the frame vent. Now this fitting here on the rear of the engine, not to be confused with the one that pumps oil into this reservoir, this is a vent fitting for the whole chassis. Now in this particular case, we teed it into the transmission breather line. So anything coming out of the transmission, anything coming out of the frame goes into the one single fitting, which just goes straight down along the scavenge line and just anything that comes out of there will dump to the atmosphere, and you don't have to worry about getting oil all over the engine like you would if you used the factory breather system. This is the factory setup, the way the factory ran the frame breather. It came out on a hose like this and came up and went piped into the air filter box, which pretty much nobody uses an air filter in the front anymore. But I don't know why some people think you need to filter the air coming out of the frame, but some people will put a filter and still run a filter system up here. But as engines run, they're constantly venting out, not in. So all you're doing when you run it up to here is, if you do have an event where you make oil comes out of this hose and you have it mounted above your radiator, it's going to dump all that oil and foam right on top of your engine and your radiator and pretty much make a total mess. So what we do is just ditch that system and run it straight down to the ground, venting it out. So if it does dump any kind of foam or oil, it doesn't get on your engine or frame. Now this fitting here on the side case, side cover, is for the transmission. Generally the factory just ran it forward and a small hose down to the left front of the engine. You can do that if you want. Works fine, unless of course you tip the quad on the left side, then it'll just drain oil out of that, because it really should have been vented over to the right side. And what we did here is we just teed it in, so this way you will never get oil draining out of your transmission in the event that you flip your quad. This is the upper water pump. It's the bleed hose. It goes into the top of the water pump cover. Pretty basic.